You are listening to the Health for All podcast, and this is your host, Sanat Kumar. I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to all the listeners of the Health for All podcast. Today
Hi.
is actually super special. I have Magda with me. Magda is not going to talk about the business of healthcare. She's not going to talk about the hospital she's potentially going to build in the future, but she's going to be talking something extremely real, extremely personal, extremely vulnerable and heartwarming. She is a survivor, a cancer survivor. She's here to talk about her experience, her journey, and her message to many, many other women and men as well who are thinking about what could be the causes of cancer, where they can get more information on, or just people who are stuck in the middle, trying to understand more about the space. So, Magda, thank you so much. Most importantly, I would say I'm grateful to have you on this show. What I really like is the joy and the happiness that I see on your face today, and I'm thankful for that. That you've come out of this and you're here to share the story, and most importantly, this is going to touch so many different lives across the globe. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm just so grateful to be here, and by here I mean alive, and also on this show. I'm very excited to tell my story and hopefully to help maybe clarify certain doubts or questions that people might have about what it means to go through cancer, what it means to survive cancer, and also what comes next.
Wonderful.
So yeah.
Before we jump into all the complexities of what we have in front of us, how are you feeling?
I'm okay. I'm doing well. Physically, I am absolutely okay. I'm considered to be cancer free. So I'm healthy. I'm well, and I'm cancer free. There is a distinction between cancer free and cured, which I think is something that anybody who has ever dealt with cancer will know. You can't really ever be cured of cancer. And the reason for that is because our technology just does not really allow us to be able to say with 100% confidence and accuracy that there is no cancer left in our bodies. So the technical term that we use is no evidence of disease, which means that in any sort of imaging or examinations that the doctors do on us, there is no physical evidence of any disease within our bodies.
That is so nice to hear, right? I'm happy at least clinically you're free of any malignancy, right? It was probably during one of the roughest times in the world. You had to go through a fairly complex set of experiences, given where we were across the globe as well. So when did this happen, Magda? How did you find out? What was your experience?
Sure. Okay, so this all happened in the spring. It started in the spring of 2021, and I was actually based in Dublin, Ireland, which is where I had spent the previous part of my career. And it was a very, very intense period for me because I had actually just gotten a new role within my company to relocate to Singapore, to Southeast Asia. And so I was kind of packing up my house, and I was making sure that I was handing over everything at work, and everything was just so hectic. My husband was already in Singapore. He had been there for 2 years, but we'd been separated by the pandemic. So it was super tough because, it was just me in our old house, and I was kind of like tasked with doing everything. So that's kind of the setting. And what happened is one day in the shower, I felt something. And I want to be super clear that I was not doing any sort of regular self-examination on my breasts or anything like that. I just kind of happened to, my hand just happened to brush against what I felt was a lump. And my first reaction was I was absolutely terrified because, like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But I'll be super honest, it lasted maybe a few seconds.
Mm,
After
mm,
that, I just completely rationalized to myself that,
mm,
well, I'm in my early 30s and
mm,
there's
mm,
just no way that this could be something serious, because that just
mm,
doesn't happen to people like me.
mm.
Um, Cancer is like, perceived to be a disease that mostly afflicts older people, and it just doesn't happen to people like me. That was my
Mm,
thought process. Obviously, that all went on within just a few seconds. So after that, I honestly sort of forgot about it, and I just went back to my super busy
mm,
schedule of handover at work and packing up the house and trying to relocate. So that was that. And what happened next is, because we were at the height of the pandemic, I actually wasn't allowed to come into Singapore. And so, because I had already gotten rid of that entire part of my life in Ireland, I
mm,
needed to wait. So I went back to Poland, which is where I'm from originally,
mm, mm.
to stay with my parents and just to wait until Singapore lets me in, so that I could actually relocate and start doing my job here. And so as I started this new role, I was working Singapore hours from Europe. And so I was quite busy in the morning, but I had a lot of time in the afternoon. So I remembered about that thing that was kind of somewhere in the back of
Mm,
my head. It's like,
mm,
oh, well, maybe now would be a good time to get a health check. And that's what I did. And the second thing that I wanted to say here is, I want to be super honest. The morning of the appointment, what was going through my head was, maybe I'll cancel the appointment because it's probably
yeah,
nothing. I don't
yeah,
really want to waste the doctor's time. I mean, it'll
yeah.
probably go away. But thankfully, I didn't. Somehow, something in the universe was guiding me to go and get that appointment.
So Magda,
So
you didn't have any symptoms otherwise, right? Apart from
no,
you noticing that lump, there was nothing else. You were just leading a very normal
nothing.
life. Okay.
Yeah, well, I was not feeling great, and I
Mm,
was very tired, and I was very stressed. But I just attributed all of that to just being stressed, because there was so much going
that's
on in
right.
my life. I was also losing weight a little bit without
Mm,
really trying, but again, I just attributed that to the stress of everything. And my main symptom really was just that very strange lump in my breast, which
mm,
the other thing is, sometimes I also Googled it and like, well, if it's cancer, it should be very hard and it should
correct.
not move. But
Yes.
then when I was touching my own lump, it was not really very hard. I thought that it was kind of squishy,
Yeah.
and I thought that it was moving around quite easily. So honestly, I really wasn't concerned. Like I said, like to the point that I almost canceled that appointment with the
Yeah.
doctor. And then another thing, just to kind of paint the picture of how unfazed I was about this, I was a little bit early to the appointment, so I went to go to some stores that were next door, and I was just browsing through some dresses, and then I realized, oh, actually, I should go to my appointment. So I took one dress and I actually went to the sales associate and I said, I just have to go pop into the doctor's next door, but I'll be back afterwards. So could you please just put this dress away from me, because I want to try it on,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, that
Uh,
you were that casual about this whole thing.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
oh, I'll just,
Yeah.
go check it out.
Yeah. And you'd not
And the
shared this with anybody. You would not shared this with your husband. You'd not shared this with anybody, right? Yeah. Okay.
No, I
At
was
that
I
point in
was
time.
seriously, I was just
Yeah.
completely unfazed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what happened next is I actually went to this appointment, and the doctor was doing an ultrasound on my breasts, and specifically on this place that I said that I'm a little bit concerned because I found something. And the doctor pretty much knew right away that this was cancer. This was like
Mm,
textbook. The way that it
mm,
looked on the ultrasound, the way that it felt, it was absolutely textbook, to the point where on her, notes and briefing from the appointment and on the referral that she gave me to get a biopsy, she actually wrote that this is a BI-RADS 5. I
mm,
had no idea what BI-RADS
mm,
meant, whether
mm,
5 is
mm,
good or bad. To be
mm,
honest, I just kind of like, okay,
mm,
well, this doesn't sound great. So maybe I
mm,
should sign in and get registered to go get a
mm,
biopsy. So
mm,
at that
mm,
point, I told my husband, who was in Singapore, I told my
mm,
parents that this was happening,
mm,
and I kind of refused to do anything about it. To be honest,
mm,
I signed up for the biopsy because that was the right thing to do. But meanwhile, my husband actually was Googling what the doctor had written on this note, and he knew that BI-RADS 5 actually meant that the doctor is pretty much 95% or more confident that what we're dealing with is actually a malignancy. I had no idea. So he knew, and so without telling me so that I wouldn't start panicking, he just very gently urged me to definitely go get that biopsy. That would be the right thing to do. So that's what I did. I got a biopsy the next day, and I'll be honest, it was a very bad experience for me. I mean, the biopsy itself is not really a very nice procedure because it involves a very big needle, and you get an anesthetic, and then the biopsy that I'm talking about specifically is a core needle biopsy, which means that
this
the
is
needle
a fine
is
needle. Is it a fine needle or
core?
a core needle biopsy?
So that's a big one. Yeah,
it's a bigger one. Okay.
So that's a big one. It looks terrifying, and because I didn't really know what I was dealing with, I just kind of came in still sort of casually, still sort of denying that anything is actually happening. And the doctor just honestly made me feel like maybe it's my fault that something is happening. And then as he was doing the ultrasound to know where the needle has to go in, he also mentioned that my lymph nodes look suspicious. Now, I honestly, I didn't know what that means, but him saying that my lymph nodes look suspicious, somewhere in my brain, what came up is like, oh, he's probably saying that if this is cancer, then there's probably some sort of metastasis, And as far as I knew, like I really didn't know much about cancer, but in my brain, if it metastasizes, that means I'm probably going to die. So that was really one of the worst moments of my life.
And were you all by yourself when you went for this, and when you saw?
Yes, because it was COVID, and so you couldn't have any visitors or anybody kind of accompanying you into the doctor's office. My mom did come with me, and she was waiting outside. But as I was lying there, as I was getting my biopsy, I was just terrified that I'm going to die. There were tears streaming down my face. This doctor was like completely unempathetic, like had just no idea what to do with me, or maybe he didn't want to because he has so many patients like me, and I don't know if doctors are maybe not trained. I don't know. Maybe he just was having a bad day. The nurse, on the other hand, after the biopsy was done, the nurse took my hand, and like the hurt and the sadness that I saw in her eyes, that was actually what convinced me that I 100% have cancer. So it's just a matter of waiting for the biopsy results. But the way that this nurse looked at me and the way she held my hands, I knew. I knew just from her reaction. So that was kind of my experience. And what happened next is I waited for the biopsy results. Unfortunately it took 3 weeks, which was a very long
Magda,
time.
before you move into that next phase already, right? Thank you for sharing that extremely personal moment, right? That you went through, and I think you brought out so many different elements of emotions. You painted the picture of how it was inside that room, the doctor's expression, the nurse's behavior to you. It's painted such a vivid scene, right? In that moment, thank you for being for sharing that vulnerable moment, for sharing that extremely personal moment, right? And I'm sure this will benefit, like I've said, benefit a lot of people going through this at that point in time. And so the information that you had, potentially you went in thinking this is really grave, right? And especially because you already received validation from somebody who clinically is sound before you got in, saying that this is most probably cancer, right? And when you saw the nurse's expression and behavior, right? And when you feel that extra warmth from somebody in front of you, you almost are certain deep down inside that there's something that they are trying to share with you, which is which is probably more than just words, right? So go ahead and tell me what happened next.
So I'll make the rest of the story kind of shorter. So what happened next is after I received my biopsy results, I had to figure out, well, how am I going to get treated? So just to remind that at this point in the story, I'm still waiting to relocate to Singapore to start my new
That's
job
right.
and to join my husband. So ideally, I would have loved to go to Singapore because of those reasons, but also because the healthcare system here is just amazing. But I didn't know if that would happen. And so my husband and I and our families, we started working on kind of two approaches at the same time. So we were applying to the Singapore government to let me in to expedite my relocation on compassionate grounds. But at the same time, I was also searching facilities in Europe, in my home country, in Poland, but also in Germany, in the UK, in Finland, and other places. Because what came back from that biopsy was that actually my cancer was quite aggressive. So the diagnosis was that I had been diagnosed with HER2 positive, hormone negative breast cancer.
Okay.
I know that doesn't mean a lot for people who are not familiar with the subject, but HER2 positive breast cancer is actually one of the more aggressive ones. And what aggressive cancer means is that it grows a lot faster compared to your kind of baseline average cancer. And what that also means is that it spreads faster. And why is that so dangerous? Because cancer as a disease, I'll just limit this to breast cancer because that's actually what I know. In the case of breast cancer, if it is detected early, it is much easier to treat. If it is detected later, it is a lot more difficult to treat. And if it has spread outside of just the breast, it actually becomes treatable but incurable. Yeah. And so the earlier it is in the diagnosis process, the better in terms of prognosis, outcomes, and also the ease of treatment. And so with this diagnosis of HER2 positive breast cancer, we knew that time was just absolutely critical because it just grows so quickly. So we needed to start my treatment as quickly as possible to prevent it from spreading, because I was still diagnosed at an early stage, but you just don't know how long it will take before it becomes too late.
Did you go through a PET CT scan to identify the stage of your cancer?
While I was in Poland, I hadn't had a PET scan just yet because that wasn't really, I mean, the technology does exist, but there's a long waiting list. So, so instead I just went through the kind of next best thing, which is getting individual scans for individual body parts. So in the case of breast cancer, where it mostly spreads statistically is the liver, the lungs, and the bones, and also the brain. But that's a little bit less frequent. And so what I did is I got a bone scan, I got a liver kind of abdomen ultrasound, and also and I also got a lung x-ray, chest x-ray. And it seemed like everything was okay, but obviously without a PET scan, it's very difficult to tell what the staging is, in fact. Also, because if you remember what I said about that really unpleasant doctor, he said that my lymph nodes looked suspicious, right? So that was like, oh my God. Very terrifying. Unfortunately, I did have a lymph node that looked very suspicious in the ultrasound. And then later when I did get a PET scan, that lymph node did look very suspicious. But just to, cut the story short here, actually what happened is that was from the COVID vaccine. So
that was from the COVID vaccine. Okay. Just for the listeners as well, right? I think lymph node swelling or lymph node related indications of swelling can also point to potentially cancer spreading to the lymph nodes, which potentially is an indication of lymphoma, either Hodgkin's or non-Hodgkin's, right? There's, of course, resources that you had access to, but there's also information overload at this point in time, and especially you're at a point in time where you don't have complete physical access to everything, given you're in the pandemic. So you were actually heavily dependent on online and non-physical communication and resources, and that can be almost information overload, right? What was your
100%.
experience, right? I know you spoke about her too, and all of this that you're telling me and the listeners is a very succinct and a beautiful summary of the million articles and the million YouTube videos and the conversations with various different practitioners you've had, right? But tell me about that experience where there's information overload and
Yeah.
conflicting detail, etc.
Absolutely. That was a very intense period of my life. So I think this kind of coincided also with the story of how my treatment kind of journey progressed. So while I was still in Poland, waiting to be relocated to Singapore, I sort of avoided any sort of information. I just wanted to keep it, like, even when I got the biopsy results, to be honest, I wasn't really, I don't know, I was just too scared to look at them because I was scared of seeing what was on that piece of paper, even though, that doesn't make a lot of sense because it already happened and that information was already real. But still, somehow psychologically, I didn't really want to read it and to accept it. So I avoided a lot of the information that I should have been absorbing at that point. But what happened next is I actually did get approval to come into Singapore in an accelerated mode. And so that's what I did. And because this was still the height of the pandemic, I couldn't start treatment right away. I had to go into 2-week quarantine at the hotel.
Oh my God.
So this is kind of the moment where I really was faced. I had to accept it because I was locked in a room for 2 weeks and all I had was my computer, and my phone. So I was able to talk to people and I was able to look for information. So at this point, I actually realized that, actually knowledge is power. And in this situation where I feel like I have lost all control because my body is doing something that, I can't stop, in order to reclaim that control, what I can do is I can learn and know as much as possible about this. And that's sort of what I did. I just started looking for information in different cancer websites. So there are a couple of government websites, whether it's the UK NHS or the Singapore website is also very good for the Singapore Cancer Center. There are, like, the US cancer.net, I believe, is a good one. There are a lot of resources that are sort of gateways into finding out more. So there's a huge learning curve because there's just so much information. And when you start off trying to understand what it is that's happening in your body, it can just be so overwhelming. Well, because we're not doctors, we weren't trained to understand this information, to make anything of it. But step by step and thread by thread, I sort of started understanding the differences in the types of cancer and the differences in treatment and what sort of treatment will coincide with what sort of survival outcome, those sort of things. And then I started going deeper and deeper. And at one point in particular, because I knew from the start that I would have to get chemotherapy because of the aggressive nature of my cancer. So I started looking for, what does chemotherapy feel like? A lot of people, I think a lot of people know what chemotherapy is because they have this image of a sick, pale, very frail patient who lost his hair, sitting in a chair with all these tubes sticking out of their arms. But what does it really feel like? And what comes after? So that's kind of where I started going. And what I discovered is a very big online community of women with breast cancer or who had survived breast cancer. And that's actually where I started getting most of my information. I think one of the reasons for this is because at that point I had already read everything that I possibly could about the dry facts about cancer. But what I started becoming a lot more interested in is, what does it feel like? What are the emotions? How do I prepare myself? How do I protect myself as I go through this process? And what I discovered is that community is actually where that information lies. And community is where you need to reach out to and where you need to embed yourself to really, really understand and to really, really prepare yourself.
That is,
Um,
uh,
mhm,
you've kind of hit an extremely important point, and I'd just like to take a pause there because uh, after going through various different avenues, you finally uh, said that the people who've experienced this and
mhm.
the patient groups who are going through this are your best source of information, right? It's
Yeah.
not the clinician, it's not the report, it's not an article which has a million words in it, and it's not a technical, dossier that you want to look at this point in time.
Mhm,
Is there a connection that you had with either a patient or a survivor at that point in time who
mhm.
kind of said, Magda, wait a minute, I know you're here in the lockdown. I'm in some other part of the world, whether it's Singapore or somewhere else, right? But let me tell you that you can make it and you will make it. And this is how you would go through this. Was there anybody,
Mm,
was there somebody that you recollect helped you through this?
yes, yes. There were a couple of amazing women who helped me get through this stage. Um, but they were not handed to me, if that makes sense. I had to go and I had
Yes.
to seek them out by
Yes.
myself.
Yes.
So I reached out to a couple of girls that I have found on Instagram, who were quite vocal about their journey and about how they had experienced it. So I just reached out and I wrote little messages to them saying, well, I'm just about to start my journey, and everything that I've read so far on your profile or on your blog is just making me feel like I'm not alone in this, and
Mm,
that
mm,
I can actually make it through. So that
mm,
was my first kind of point of contact with just a couple of the girls in the breast cancer community online.
mm,
And then the second person was actually in Singapore.
mm,
There is a group called the Breast Cancer Foundation, which is one of the main support groups available here. And this woman had gone through breast cancer 8 years ago. She also had the same exact type as me, so HER2 positive. And
mm.
she was also an expat, which is also very important as you're coming into a
Yes.
foreign
Yes.
place. And so I connected with her because she is the wife of one of my husband's colleagues. So I
Mm,
was able to get in touch with her. I sent her an email, and then within a few hours of reading that email, she got back to me saying, "Let's jump on a call,
mm,
and I can answer any questions that you have." And that's what I did. And she was also enormously helpful because she actually took me step by step through what the process looks like, not just what the process looks like, but what the process looks like in Singapore.
mm,
So what can I
mm,
expect? Where I should look for information? What sort of things I should already start doing to start preparing? Whether it's changes in my diet, for example, or kind of just wrapping my head around the fact that I'm going to lose my hair and I'm going to look very different, and there are so many changes that will be happening to my body, and it's just best to prepare for that. So that one phone call really just changed things so much for me,
mm,
just
mm.
because I really I saw and I could almost touch the fact that so many women have been down this path before me. I'm not alone, and it's just something that I'm going to have to do. But
That's
it's
amazing.
doable.
No, that's
Yeah.
amazing. And and you need a lot of mental strength to be able to have that conversation, to be able to weed through information, and
Mm,
all in the middle of being locked in,
mm.
for 2 weeks.
That was not
I,
easy.
I can't even imagine what you went through, right? So kudos to being super brave and strong during that time. And you really meandered through a whole lot of information yourself, and then finally found one or two people who've gone through that, who become kind of the voice behind how to go through this, right, successfully,
Hmm.
which talks a lot about the system, which talks a lot about where we are. Although a lot of institutions are trying to do their best to spread
Hmm.
information, but when it comes to actually happening it in reality, right, the actions that a patient takes, I don't think the
Hmm.
system has really understood how to tackle that, right? Uh, how do they make sure that when an incident happens, the
Hmm.
patient resorts to places of comfort, resorts to places where they can feel comfortable accessing information, etc. I don't think we've cracked that as a, as a community. Please.
I do think that there's a difference because there are helplines. There absolutely are helplines that I'm sure a lot of people do use. I just think that those helplines are probably a lot more helpful for older generations. As an introverted millennial, I don't like picking up the phone and calling somebody. And so, I know that a lot of people are just like me. And so what we resort to is just going on the internet and looking for things by ourselves. And then gradually we start leaning towards some sort of, social network community, because that is how we grew up. And that is how things just come naturally to us. But that doesn't mean that the helplines that are available and the websites and the information that's available for older patients, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work for them. Just for me, it wouldn't work. And, the other thing is as we age, as our generation sort of ages, there will be more and more patients there will be more and more people becoming patients. And so I think it is important for cancer hospitals and institutions and doctors to realize that, and also just to change the channels a little bit so that they are more inviting to us, so that we can actually go and find that information. But that being said, still there's a huge disconnect between the dry facts and like the information about the physical that is available versus the resources that you can find that are about mental health and that are about emotional well-being, and even the materials that are offered to families and caregivers also mostly focus on the dry facts, not on how to support people through the actual journey and through the emotions. So that's definitely a gap that I think needs to be addressed.
So from the time you were in that room, right? When you knew it was almost for certain this is HER2 positive, to the time you spoke to that the expat in Singapore who gave you so much strength. Of course, your mind and your body is going through its own journey, right, of dealing with these changes. At any point, either during the transition or during the conversations, did the doctor tell you these are the two resources that you need to look up immediately? These are the 3 numbers you need to call immediately, or this is somebody who's sitting outside who will talk to you about what potentially could go wrong in this? Yes.
No.
Sad.
Credit to her. I have an amazing oncologist, and she saved my life, and I absolutely love her. But she is a doctor who focuses on getting rid of the cancer cells. She doesn't focus on telling us what happens or how do we help ourselves or where do we look to information. And that makes sense because, doctors' time is very valuable, and they should be focusing on what is their job, which is curing people. It's kind of better with the nurses, I would say. Each cancer center does have nurses, and the nurses, because they are more in touch with the patient, and I mean that very physically, like they're the ones who are, touching us, who are cannulating us, putting the tubes into our veins. They sit with us, they hold our hands as we go through treatment. They are actually the part of the healthcare system that patients, I think, rely on a lot more for all of those emotional kind of aspects of things. But that also doesn't mean that any sort of information is actually given, proactively. Maybe the problem is that there's a huge divide between just the physical dry facts and just the hand holding, but kind of like, there's nothing that really bridges that. Yeah. I know that there are a lot of cancer centers that are trying to bridge that gap by offering some sort of mental health support in the form of a counselor or in the form of a pamphlet, maybe. But I think the truth is that those sort of resources are still very much limited just to palliative care, which is, for patients who are at that incurable stage.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say this, because when you talk about emotional support, mental health, etc.,
Mhm.
if it is given to a patient in the form of a commercial offering or a
Mhm.
brochure to say, hey, listen, here's an option, right? And it could be right next to an IKEA pamphlet, or right next to a pamphlet you're taking the MRT to. Uh, Something's wrong in the way
Mhm.
you're communicating this to the patient first time, right?
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
one. Uh, the the part that I want to touch a little bit upon, right,
Mhm.
is there's a lot of stigmas, there's a lot of
Mhm.
myths
Mhm.
that is surrounding breast cancer and cancer in general, but particularly breast cancer, right? Different communities have various different myths. There's a belief that, predominantly if it's hereditary, you end up having a higher chance of getting breast cancer, which is not true, because only 10% of women who get breast cancer is actually linked to something to do with hereditary, right? What is your
Mhm.
experience with regard to myths and stigmas? What did you face?
Mhm. Sure. I think there are a couple of things. Firstly, the biggest myth is that young women don't get cancer. I am a victim of that. It's not true. It's not true that young women don't get cancer. Statistically speaking, if you look at the worldwide kind of statistics, 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer in their
Yeah,
lifetime, but
yeah,
that is mostly towards the tail end, I would say, of,
yes,
of that age curve. The median, if I recall correctly, I think is 63 years
yeah,
for diagnosis.
yeah,
I was diagnosed in my early 30s, and the incident rate is, I think, 1 in 500 or even more than that. And
mm,
actually, 1 in 500 is really, it's not that
yeah,
huge, actually, if you think
yeah,
about it. It's
exactly,
like,
exactly,
it's basically a theater. If you fill
exactly.
one theater with a group of women, one or two of them will have breast cancer at the age of 30. So it's really not that uncommon. The second myth that's kind of related to that as well is that men don't get breast cancer,
Mm,
but they
mm,
do. Of course, it's
mm,
not as frequent because the male breast is obviously a lot smaller. But still, if the lifetime stat for women is 1 in 8, for men it's 1 in 800. So it still does happen. I think the biggest thing that people have to remember here is that the single biggest risk factor for having breast cancer is having breast tissue, and everybody has
mm,
that unless
mm,
they've had a mastectomy and that's been
mm,
removed.
mm,
Um, and so what that means is it's not up to prophylactic screening after the age of 50 to
mm,
catch
mm,
any signs of,
mm,
of early cancer, but it's actually on us as patients to be able to do that for ourselves. So what that means is we need to have awareness of what
mm,
our normal is,
mm,
and
mm,
B, we need to have a process for detecting anything that is away from normal, and that's both for young women and for men. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing that is a myth. The second thing is that cancer equals death. Um,
yeah,
and that's a very hard one because obviously for a lot of people cancer does equal death.
mm, mm,
Um, but I think in my experience, even as I was going into the journey, I was convinced that I was going to die. And people who these days reach out to me who have just been diagnosed also think that they're going to die. So there is this stigma that that a cancer diagnosis will always lead to death, which is not true because treatments are improving and screening techniques are improving, and also awareness and education is increasing. And so what that means is actually death rates are decreasing. As an example here, I think I read somewhere that for the past several years, the actual incidence of breast cancer is increasing more or less
yeah,
by 0.5% each year,
yeah, yeah,
but the death rate is actually decreasing. And I
correct.
think it's decreased something crazy like 40% or something in the
Yeah,
last couple of years.
yeah,
And that's incredible. And what that means is it's not necessarily a death sentence. But in order for that to be true, we must focus on early detection, because going back to what I said earlier, early detection means that it is more treatable and there are more treatments available, and it is easier to get rid of the cancer cells that are there because they maybe haven't mutated as much yet. You know, so I think that's the second thing. The third thing that I wanted to mention is kind of an emotional point, which is the whole language that we use around fighting with cancer. The reason I want to mention that is because it's very normal to use that sort of language when speaking about cancer, that I am fighting with cancer, I'm battling cancer, I'm in a fight, and it's violent, and I'm putting all my efforts and all my resources into this fight that I'm going through. But the sad truth is that that's not really what it is. In a lot of cases, cancer is just down to really bad luck and really bad biology. And even if somebody puts in all the energy and all the effort that they possibly can, and they get all the treatments, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will get out of this and that they will survive. So I think that's one of the other things that is a little bit of a stigma. And I think a lot of us in the cancer community are trying to change that a little bit, because it just puts so much pressure on the patient, like we're already going through treatment. We don't want to also fight.
That is super, super powerful, Magda, what you've just said about the choice of words that you use. And I think that's a learning for a lot of us, for me too, to not use words that potentially are putting additional stress on the patient itself. Thank you for sharing that. Going by that same thread, Magda, you had gotten a new job, you were super excited, right? And importantly, employers react differently in this circumstance. Some of them are super supportive, some of them are more detached, if I may, but we leave it up to you to how you want to handle it. And some of them are extremely family-like. What was your experience and learnings from having to show up as a professional during this rough phase?
Sure. That's another big topic that I think about a lot, because I think it also goes back to cancer being associated with being a disease that mostly affects older people. Not a lot of people meet somebody who is a cancer patient or a cancer survivor in the workplace, and so not a lot of people know how to deal with it. And also the patients themselves don't really know how to go through it from a professional point of view, because there's just no blueprint. So in my experience, I was incredibly lucky to be working at a company that gave me the choice if I, first of all, wanted to continue working through treatment, and secondly, whether I chose to share the diagnosis with my colleagues. I know that not everybody gets that chance, so I was incredibly privileged. I think the first decision here is whether to work through treatment or not. Is a very personal one, but it also, like, I do want to acknowledge that it also comes from a place of privilege, because not everybody is able to step away from work in order to focus on their health, because they might not be able to have paid medical leave from their employer, or they might not have health insurance that actually covers all of their treatments. But it does kind of come down to the trade-off of the energy that you're putting in. You can take that energy and you can put it into your treatment, or you could put it into your work, and that's a very, very difficult decision to make. But if you are fortunate enough to be able to make that choice, that's a huge privilege. But the decision is also very personal. And then the second thing is whether or not to share that decision with colleagues. And this I think is also a very difficult and very personal decision. for various reasons. So I think, firstly, a lot of patients are afraid that if they do share their diagnosis, they will encounter some sort of bias and discrimination.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about it, makes sense because, one of the main things that cancer patients who are going through active treatment deal with is fatigue and,
Yeah.
cognitive issues. So it's very difficult to keep up. And so what that means is perhaps there might be a little bit of discrimination because employers obviously also want to do the best thing for the company. So they might end up, for example, not selecting a cancer patient for a very high profile project or something. So that's one thing. The second thing is, it goes back to that emotional aspect again of, sharing a diagnosis with colleagues means being very vulnerable and very open and sharing something that is very, very personal on the one side. But then on the other side, a cancer diagnosis is something so terrifying that in a lot of cases, the person who is receiving that news from the cancer patient doesn't know how to react. And what ends up happening is the cancer patient has to cheer up the person who's hearing this news.
Oh my God, that is that I have I have not heard it this way, but yes, absolutely. Yeah, please continue. Yes.
And it comes from a good place, but I've also had that experience where I was telling one of my stakeholders that, oh well, I'm actually going to take some time off to focus on cancer treatment, and this woman broke down in the meeting and she started crying, and it just made me feel so bad because I ended up having to, to comfort her. So that was a little bit awkward. But on the other hand, again, it goes back to not having a blueprint for any of these behaviors and people not really knowing how to behave. I think the other thing I just wanted to kind of touch upon here is if you're an executive or if you're a leader in a company, that choice that you make, those two choices that you make. So firstly, whether or not you choose to work through treatment, and secondly, whether or not you choose to share your diagnosis, they will be judged. There's really no right or wrong answer here. Everybody has to take a personal decision. But for an executive and somebody who who's a role model in the organization, there is a lot of additional pressure about sharing their diagnosis and potentially working through their diagnosis because you're role modeling certain behaviors in the organization. And so, do you want to encourage people to bring their authentic self to work and, show humanity? Or do you want to show that it's okay to prioritize health over work? So it comes down to a very difficult choice. Like in the company that I was working for at that time, there was a very senior executive who was going through cancer, and she decided to share the diagnosis with everybody. And there were actually, she was leading meetings from the chemo chair. And on the one hand, you can't really judge, because if that's the sort of thing that gets you through treatment, then I'm all for it. But then on the other hand, when it was my turn and I had to make those decisions, I couldn't help but remember how I felt, looking at those meetings that she was leading from her chemo chair, and I felt, well, if she could do it, then surely I can do it as well. So it's kind of a question of what sort of behaviors do you want to model?
Precedence do you set? Yes.
Such a difficult decision, and I think it took me a very long time to learn not to judge any sort of decisions that people are making as they are on their own cancer journey. It's a very personal thing. I myself, just to close it out with my own personal experience, like I said, I was incredibly fortunate to be working at a company that paid for my health insurance and my treatment, that gave me the choice to take paid time off. That was an incredible privilege, and leadership that was incredibly supportive to any choice that I would have made. I personally decided to take time off for very selfish reasons. Firstly, I wanted to make sure that I am putting all my energy into healing. But secondly, I was in a new role. I had just come into it. I hadn't built a reputation yet. Nobody knew what I was capable of and how I would actually, perform in this role. And so I wanted to give myself the best possible chances of setting myself up for success in this role. And I knew that if I decided to work through treatment, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to show up, as my best self. So that was a very personal decision for me. Somebody else in my position may have chosen otherwise, but I think I made the right choice.
But Magda, just looking at the joy and looking at the positivity that you're exuberating at this point in time, in all honesty, I can say you've taken the right decision, right? And of course, you talked about the privilege that some of us have to take that decision and take a back seat and focus on just the healing aspect of it, but not a large, in fact, majority of the population don't have that privilege. And
Exactly.
As you were talking about showing up, and as you were talking about the leader sitting on a chemo chair, I recollect an incident in Singapore, actually, when I was working for a client, and I was probably there for close to about 1.5 to 2 years. There was a lady in the security that would check our bags, right? And in the first few months, there was always this anger she displayed when she was checking bags, right? She would just take the bag. She'd be very stern, and people would think, why is she always in a bad mood, right? She'd say, "Open your bag." How many times have I asked you to do that? Every time you meet somebody who's a personality that's slightly different and who walks into your life every single morning, becomes a part of your daily routine. And over a period of 5 to 6 months, I saw her go through changes. I saw her go through the fact that she wasn't checking the bag standing. She would sit on a chair and check the bag. And then I just paused one day and I said, how are you? What happened? Is everything okay with you? And she just said, no, I just had my last chemo session today. And it's been a really rough day. I just finished it and I had to come to work. And those words still stay in my mind. And every time I'm in a situation, whether it's with my kids or with my family, where we tend to take things for granted in terms of the privilege and the platter that we are served, I always think about the courage she came with. People could have judged her saying, I mean, why are you doing this? Right? But the choices that you make in life, sometimes you don't have a choice. Right. So
Absolutely.
I wanted to share that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to share that story because it's powerful. We're talking about various different stratas of the society, and all the way from driving important board discussions, sitting in a chemo chair, to so the reasons can be extremely different. And as you rightly said, judging anybody's choice would be the wrong thing to do at this point in time.
Exactly. It's so important just to what you said. It's so important to recognize that and acknowledge that you're right. Some of the choices that we make, they're not really choices. We just have to.
Yeah. You and I spoke a little bit about survivorship, right? In our previous conversations, and the need for mental health support, not just during the course of your treatment, but also post-recovery. As you rightly said, the very beginning in the conversation, you're not fully cured from cancer. They just clinically can't find anything more malignant in you.
Yes.
Right. But let's all say that you're cured for now, right? Everybody who's clinically tested is cured, right? And
cancer-free. I also prefer the word cancer-free.
Yes, cancer-free is good. Cancer-free, right? So what do you have to say about that, Magda? Did you access any mental health apps? If you can share some insights on that.
Yeah, sure. So coming from a place where I can actually look back at the things that I did and what was the most helpful for me, and what I would encourage anybody who is going through this journey, or perhaps knows somebody who's going through this journey, I think mental health is probably just as important as the physical health. And I think there are 3 things that any patient can do to make this work for themselves. So firstly, kind of recognize, identify, and choose your own circle of support, whether that's family or friends or anybody else, and just really make sure that you're leaning on these people. Another thing that we haven't spoken about, but also happens a lot, is cancer patients don't ask for help because they want to do everything by themselves because that's what they're used to. And as you're going through treatment, it just makes things a lot easier if you're able to lean on somebody. So that's the first kind of area. The second one is community, and I touched upon that a little bit earlier. And it's incredibly important to be able to feel that you are part of something, you're not alone, and you have that sort of community to lean on as well. So whether that's physical, there are support groups that patients can find. If anybody in Singapore is listening to this, I highly recommend BCF, the Breast Cancer Foundation. Because just coming together and sharing stories and listening to other people share their stories has an enormous therapeutic effect. And also, these sort of communities help create friendships and strengthen your own support system. I saw one study that said that women who had weak support systems going through breast cancer treatment specifically were, I think, 43% more likely to die afterwards than women who had really strong social connections and strong support systems. So, you know, it's not just a matter of, you know, fuzzy mental health jargon. This is actually scientifically grounded. Yes. So that's the physical side of community. And then I highly, highly encourage the virtual side as well. The thing about the cancer community is that it spans the entire world, and it doesn't matter what country you're from and what language you usually speak and which stage you are and what sort of cancer you have. You know, the internet helps bring us together and we can share those experiences. So, you know, there are so many Instagram accounts, and there are so many blogs out there, and there are so many Facebook groups and chat groups, and, you know, just so much. So it's so important to just find that tribe and really feel part of it. Because it's actually a lot easier to find support online than it is in real life. And then the third thing I would say, I know that in Southeast Asia, this is still a little bit of a taboo, but I highly recommend therapy. I've been in therapy. I wish I'd actually done it sooner, but I only started when I was about 5 months into treatment. And I started seeing a therapist that actually specializes in cancer patients. And that was enormously helpful. There are certain things that as a cancer patient you go through that you don't necessarily even share with your family, so that first circle, or your community, so that second circle. There's a huge amount of guilt that we carry as cancer patients. Like for me, before I started therapy, I carried this huge amount of guilt that I hadn't gone to the doctor sooner, you know, and even though I was still diagnosed at an early stage, I could have done it months before, but I just chose not to, you know. So therapy is actually a path that is available, and I highly recommend for people to use that, because it just helps deal with all those emotions that you think that you're alone in, but you're really not. This is very common for cancer patients to go through.
Thanks for advocating that, Magda. I think that's one of the most important things. Mental health has always been a taboo, let alone you know, cancer, but mental health in general is considered a taboo in many parts of this world, right? Did the family, did your husband and your parents and your friends, did they also, because I know apart from the patient, right, the caregiver, the primary caregiver, the support, the partner usually goes through their own journey, right?
Absolutely.
What do you have to say about that? Did they receive any kind of counseling? Did they speak to?
No. I will say that again, no. And I think that is also something that needs to be addressed, because if you think about it, caregivers are actually in a slightly worse situation. I mean,
Yes.
I know that they're not the ones who are actually going through the cancer journey, but they are there to support along the way, and they are holding the hand, and they are the ones that, you know, cancer patients wake up to in the middle of the night and share their fears and their concerns. And in a way, you know, being a caregiver is incredibly hard, and very, very difficult. And on top of that, because they are not the ones who are going through the cancer journey, everybody forgets about them, and nobody ever asks about, how are you doing? You know, how are you holding up with this? What can I do to help you? So I would also highly encourage, you know, if you know anybody who is a caregiver to a cancer patient, just reach out and ask how they're doing. It's so incredibly important. They are actually the ones who are carrying just so much of that burden to take care of the patient, and also, you know, their own emotions, and really not a lot of people are addressing that. So thank you so much for asking about that, and on behalf of my husband and also everybody else who you know, supported me along on that journey.
So, you know,
We're grateful for the recognition.
no, I think leading this dual personalities and dual kind of images that they have to show up to. That's so important to provide support to the caregiver as well. And I'm glad we had that dialogue about that as well. Magda, what I want to end with is breast cancer is one of the most common occurrences globally. By 2040, it's estimated that about 3 million people will be diagnosed with breast cancer, and close to 1 million will succumb to it, right? What is your advice to women, men of various different age groups who are, whether it's on diagnosis, whether it's on treatment, and whether it's on survivorship? Would love to hear, what do you want to say to them?
I think it's cancer as a condition, I think, is also forecasted to touch 1 in every 2 people in their lifetime. And so there's really no getting away from it. It is such a big thing that will touch so many people. And so I think the best we can do really is to make sure that we are focusing on early detection. Like I said so many times before, early detection is what is crucial to improve survival. And so the main message that I kind of want to put out there is for people to really know their baseline. So, you know, get to know your body, know what is normal for you, and know what is not normal. And, you know, in the case of breast cancer, that's doing a self-examination so that you actually learn your body and you know when changes are occurring. But for other types of cancer, that also means, you know, check your skin, do your screening, go get a chest x-ray, get ultrasounds. If there is any sort of screening that is recommended at a certain age, please do not delay it. But in fact, go to the doctor and get your checkup. The earlier cancer is detected, the more curable it is. Even though we don't say cured, we say no evidence of disease. Still, for all intents and purposes, you will not get a cure if you don't detect it early, most likely. So that is the absolute number one message that I want to put out there. And the second thing is, you know, just take care of people. And if you know somebody who's going through cancer, reach out to them and offer some support, because that emotional and mental well-being aspect that we talked about so much also has to come from us. You know, it's not fair to put it on the cancer patient for them to go out and find out everything by themselves, and to find that support and to find that comfort. All of us actually have a role to play here, and it can be just as simple as reaching out and saying, hey, I'm thinking about you. How are you doing? I
Mm,
hope you're feeling well. I hope your week goes by quickly. I hope your chemo goes smoothly.
mm.
Just hang in there. So, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Magda, thank you so, so much. Uh, this is probably one of the best conversations I've had in a very, very long time. The difference that this podcast is hopefully going to make to many, many, many people who are going to be listening to this. Um, and thank you for being absolutely open and sharing some very, very personal stories, right, as part of this podcast.
Of course.
And more power to you. Uh, and stay joyful, stay happy, keep that smile on your face. I think the strength with which you've handled the entire journey, the courage with which you've managed the various different stakeholders, from being in the unknown to being in lockdown to being actually to going through treatment in an absolutely new country. You've shown a lot of strength, resilience, and uh, nothing can be better than the fact that now you're coming out and speaking to the world about this, uh, which is helping many, many, many more women, right? Even if one woman or a man listens to you and says, listen, I think I feel weird too, I need to go get a mammogram or an x-ray, I'd call this a success, right?
Thank you
So
so much.
so thank you so, so much. And also because we'll be celebrating Women's Day, uh, this is an even more special episode. Uh, so thank you. And you have a great rest of the day. And
Thank you
and
so much.
and I'll meet you definitely in person when I get to Singapore.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sanath, for having me on your podcast, and for giving me the opportunity to tell my story and to raise a little bit of awareness. And I really hope that if, like you said, if at least one person takes away from this, that they should go and get screened or they should go do a self-examination. For me, that is a win. So thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. And I really enjoyed the
Wonderful.
conversation as well.
Me too. Wonderful. Thank you so much. You take care.
Thank you.